On the streets of Berlin have been born the great and terrible ideas of our time. The theory of relativity, communism, and fascism. Theories of sex and sexuality. And the conception of the atomic bomb. The story of Berlin from the city's earliest days is one of a clash of ideas that would define the modern world. It was 1919. Germany had been defeated in the Great War. The Kaiser had been forced to abdicate, and after a bloody battle for Berlin with the communists, a fragile republic was declared. The liberalism of the new so-called Weimar Republic would encourage a host of new creative ideas in Berlin, but also dangerously destructive ones. It was an era that was best depicted by the painter George Grosz. In the toads of possession, rich Berlin industrialists count their money while looking down on the city's downtrodden workers and wounded soldiers. Grosz wrote in a letter that this image was to Berlin what Hogarth's Gin Lane was to London.
It is a large picture of hell, of grotesque corpses and lunatics. On the right, a young man is throwing up on the canvas all the illusions of youth. I'm totally convinced that this epoch is sailing down to its own destruction.
One day, George Grosz made his way, as usual, to the local cigar shop. It was just another normal Berlin day in the 1920s. The cigar man smiled and handed over Gross's regular order. Grosz smiled back, and then he noticed something different. Instead of the usual hammer and sickle lapel badge that the cigar man used to wear, there was now a different symbol. It was strange, it was exotic, and a few years later, it was to define a whole nation. In 1926, the new Nazi Party organizer for Berlin arrived in the city. He was a fresh-faced young man named Joseph Goebbels. And the story of his ideological assault on the city is one of the great, grim turning points in Berlin history. Goebbels had grown up a poor child with a club foot. He yearned for some kind of national rebirth, and he found hope in Hitler's National Socialists. The Nazi Party promised a return to a strong, militarized, racially pure Germany. He took over a grubby party office in a city where the Nazis were virtually unheard of. Goebbels feared the power of the left-leaning social satire of George Grosz and other radical artists of Berlin. He set about turning the city towards National Socialism. Goebbels would make it his job to turn Red Berlin into Nazi Berlin. The absence of imperial rule made the city a dangerous place, but it also transformed the social and cultural life of Berlin. Heavy censorship had been lifted, and as people fought on the streets, Berlin danced to the international craze of jazz and cabaret in a way that no other city on the planet did. The sexual underworld of Berlin in the 1920s represented not just a way of life, or for that matter, a good night out. Like everything else in this city at that time, it embodied a political idea. Magnus Hirschfeld, a Berlin sexologist who'd been much censored during the early decades of the century, found new freedom during the Weimar Republic. Hirschfeld was even given a royal palace in which to house his Institute for Sexual Research. the federal chancellery of Germany now occupies its site. Hirschfeld himself was gay, and he argued that since sexual differences were determined by nature, homosexual practice had to be equally natural. It was the kind of logic that made him into a prime target for the likes of Joseph Goebbels and his Nazi rabble-rousers. Not that that stopped Hirschfeld from lobbying for the repeal of the law against homosexual practice. He was perhaps the world's first political gay rights campaigner, a fact which the city he loved has never forgotten.
Berliner Tempo, Betrieb und Tamtam. Hätt ich auch wohl ne Wohnung und wär sie noch so neu. Ich bleib Berlin, meiner alten Liebe treu.
Voltaire's 200-year-old vision of the city was never more true.
Ja, die ist ein bisschen laut. Mit nur schon das Ballett und morgen auf uns direkt. Ach, nun setz dich mal, mein Schatz. Ich mach uns erstmal grünen Tee. Ich komm gerade zurück aus Köln, da war ich mit dem schönen Bär. Ich war doch nicht etwa einmal ja nur Rosenberg-Konzert. Du bist verrückt und im Karo hatte ich genossen. Mit dem Gerd leider nicht. Oh. Mutterkomplex.
Frau Schlenske.
Servus.
Was nenne ich Sie denn?
Frau Schlenske.
Frau Schlenske, okay, ja, vielen Dank.
Margot natürlich.
Ja, klar. Ich erzähle jetzt die Metamorphose von Frau Schlenske, von Margot Schlenske zu Herrn Reetz.
In mich zumindest in Zivil, ja, richtig, ja.
Ja.
Ich werde aber auch im zivilen Leben als Margot immer angesprochen.
Ach, wirklich? Ja.
In unseren Kreisen ist das so, ja, einheitlich. Ist das Margot und nichts weiter sonst.
Seht ihr euch als ein Kontinuum der Berliner Geschichte?
Dieses Lied, was da so um 1900 irgendwie rauskam, hat, also ich weiß nicht, ob das der Titel war, aber die Textteile kamen drin vor. Du bist verrückt, mein Kind, du musst nach Berlin, da wo die Verrückten sind, da gehörst du hin.
Da gehörst du hin, ja.
Da gehörst du hin, genau, richtig. Und ich glaube, einerseits die total Verrückten, die woanders wirklich als Dorftrottel und Bekloppte abgestempelt worden sind, die kamen nach Berlin. Und ich glaube, das ist der Grund gewesen, weshalb die ganzen Verrückten oder die irgendwie anders leben, es wirklich nach Berlin zieht.
Many of those drawn to Berlin during the 1920s made a beeline for Schöneberg. Then, as now, the gay center of the city. One was a young Englishman named Christopher Isherwood. He lived at number 17 Nollendorfstrasse, and it was here that he wrote the tales of his experiences. Published in the book Goodbye to Berlin, they later became the film Cabaret. Isherwood saw Berlin as a powder keg waiting to explode. Hyperinflation had bankrupted the city, creating a population of destitute millionaires. Goebbels' Nazi militias were on the up and up, out on the streets, openly picking fights with communist gangs. As Isherwood and his friends drank and danced the night away,
Berlin was in a state of civil war. Hate exploded suddenly, without warning, out of nowhere. Knives were whipped out, blows were dealt with spiked rings, beer mugs, chair legs, or leaded clubs. Bullets slashed the advertisements on the poster columns, rebounded from the iron roofs of latrines. May Day, 2009. This was always a favorite day for fighting on the streets of Berlin. Today, a contentious political rally is being held in the district of Köpenick. So this building here is the headquarters of the NPD, the neo-fascist party, the extreme right-wing party. You see the man there, they want to show exactly who they are.
Wenn wir uns das Deutschland der heutigen Zeit anschauen, diese Massenarbeitslosigkeit, diese Verblödung hervorgerufen durch eine systematische Ovation, dann ist es das Resultat ihrer Befreiung und ich fühle mich nicht befreit.
That's the thing about Berlin. It's half street fight, and as you can see, half carnival. Everyone here is always up for a party, and more often than not, the party turns into a fight.
Ich hab so Heimweh nach dem Kurfürstendamm. Hab so ne Sehnsucht nach meinem Berlin. Und seh ich auch in Frankfurt, München, Hamburg oder Wien, die Leute sich bemühen, Berlin bleibt doch Berlin. Ach, ich habe so Heimweh nach dem Kurfürstendamm. Berliner Tempo, Betrieb und Tamtam. Hätte ich auch wohl eine Wohnung und wär sie noch so neu, ich bleib Berlin meiner alten Liebe treu.
Vintage Berlin stuff.